We're 4 weeks into the season, so it's time to ask the question, who's the best team in the best conference in America right now? That's the Pac-12. Washington has a compelling case.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and soon to be mostly team-free, but until then, beloved and very, very loaded Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch the show, which today is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. We've got some Husky talk, Pac-12 power rankings, and Michael Penix later, which means that we have Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies at rTomashoff34 on Twitter. Also covers Washington for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. Let's dive right into it, Roman. There is a case that can be made for several teams as the best in the Pac-12, which is still the best conference in the country. We don't have 8 teams ranked anymore. We have a meager 6. Only half the league. Only half the league is ranked. But I imagine you can readily make a case for Washington being the best team in the league to this point. What do you think that case is rooted in?
So I would hope that's why you invited me here, not just to like have me do that and then just make fun of me. So I
thought about it. I thought about it.
I'm not surprised. It starts with Michael Penix, right? It has to. Michael Penix, and to shout out Tom Fornelli, this whole offense, which is just a wagon of a team. You've got Penix, you got Rome Odunze, you got Jalen McMillan, you got Jalen Polk. Jalen McMillan didn't even have to play, and Washington's just thrashing of the Cal Golden Bears, your California Golden Bears, Spencer, this past week to just beat them 59-32. For anybody who didn't watch that game, first of all, I'm sorry, go rewatch it. But the Huskies had 14 points before Michael Penix even touched the football.
I know.
It's wild. That was the biggest thing coming into the year was the defense. Will the defense do enough? Will they be okay? And the answer so far this year has been definitively yes. Because I don't want to hear anything just kind of going back to this game against Cal. I don't want to hear anything about, they gave up 500 yards and 30 points. No, they didn't.
No.
The defense gave up 297 yards and 18 points. Anything that happened in the fourth quarter was done against walk-ons and true freshmen by Cal's starting offense. So that does not count.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely not as close as the final score indicated, and the final score was a 27-point win for the Huskies, and that's the honest assessment of it. Like it was over quickly. They had 52 points. What was it with 8 minutes to go in the third quarter? And that's a Cal defense.
By halftime.
Was it 52 at the half or
no? It was 45 at the half.
45 at the half against a Cal defense that is far from the worst they will see in the Pac-12 this year. I mean, it's not top tier, but it is certainly. Yeah, it's certainly not at the bottom for sure. So I thought it'd be a good time to bring up a little Pac-12 power rankings right now. And the way that I'm looking at this is who has been the most impressive in all 4 weeks and is, the sum of their parts going off of what we have seen so far. These can, of course, change. I haven't really done this throughout the course of the season, but I thought it was an interesting time, Roman, because this league is the best conference in the country. It is insanely deep. We have, as a league, spots 7 through 10 held in reserve, like we called ahead, to a restaurant and said, "Hi, can we get spots 7 to 10, please?" And it's USC, Washington, Oregon, and Utah in that order in the top 10. Like that's something only the SEC's ever done.
Washington, USC now. They flipped in this past.
Well, yeah, that's right. Washington is 7, USC's 8. Oregon is 9, and Utah is 10. See, that's why we bring them on. Someone has to keep me accountable for my nonsensical inaccuracy on here. But I think that from what I have seen so far, I do have Washington power rated as number 1. And look, some people will look at their schedule and say it's a weak schedule to this point. I think that is true. It is certainly not the strongest FPI schedule of anybody in the Pac-12. However, What I am basing these rankings off of, for me personally, and Roman has his own rankings and reasons and such, is based on the competition you have played, how have you looked in each of those weeks, combined with what do I think your potential is. Washington has not played a really good team yet. That's true. They might not have played a bowl-eligible team yet. That's true. Against those 4 teams, though, the question that I ask is, how can you look more dominant on both sides of the ball, by the way? As you mentioned with the defense, I don't think you can look more dominant than Washington has through the first 4 games. Every single play in their offense looks like, screw it. One of these receivers is down there somewhere, but it's an organized form of that, and it works over and over. They're explosive, dynamic. They run the ball well enough. Offensive line has been good. I've got Washington number 1. I have Oregon number 2. We can get to that in a moment. I imagine you also have the Huskies at the top.
Stunner. Yes, I do. I know. Shocking coming from me. No, I absolutely do. And it's because of everything you just said. And like, you can talk about they played a week schedule all you want, but it doesn't matter because you can only play the team who's in front of you. And that's something and it's something I harp on over on Locked On Huskies all the time, is that these are not the Chris Peterson Washington Huskies, where Pete's Washington Huskies would constantly just somewhat play down to their level of competition. You and I were talking about the 2019 Cal game right before we pressed record here.
Lightning Bowl.
The Lightning Bowl, which is just one of the prime examples of that. And there are so many other examples where it's just the Huskies were the more talented team by a very large margin, but the coaching staff didn't take full advantage of that. And that's something that Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb do every single week. And that's without even talking about the talent that's on the field, as I mentioned earlier with Michael Penix and the whole cast of characters that you know and love. But you can only play who's in front of you, right? And Washington has taken 69% of their snaps this season on either side of the ball. Just 69% of their snaps this year have been with them up 14 plus points. That's just the definition of dominance.
The only semi-close element of their season has been the first quarter, literally the first quarter of the season against Boise State.
Yep.
The Broncos were kind of pushing them in Seattle, and then they woke up, and then that game was a runaway, and they covered like a 14.5 points, but they won by like 25 points.
So do you want to know the craziest thing about this? Like, it's something where I've talked about it with players on the team. Roma Dunze is one of the biggest examples of this, where we've asked him multiple times over the course of the season when we have media availability. And we've always asked, does it feel like this offense can kind of do more? And he's like, yeah, this isn't Washington's peak offense.
I don't know, man. Like, what more can you do? Penix is leading the country in passing, isn't he?
He is, and that's the thing. Every single week, not only do you, like, if you go back and watch the film, you say, oh wow, they didn't hit this, they didn't score on that drive. Where there are drives, there are certain plays where it's they missed there, and every single week, it doesn't matter how many points they've scored. I've come away with this feeling. My co-host on Locked On Huskies, Lars Hansen, has come away with this feeling of they could have scored 70 if they really wanted to.
Well, I want to push back on that just a little, because when you throw the ball downfield as much as Washington does, even with a guy who's as accurate as Michael Penix, you're not going to hit 100% of your deep shots.
No, absolutely not. No, you're right.
And I think that's kind of where that comes into play.
But it's not that. It's not that, they missed on that deep shot and that could have been points. There was a play right before the first half of in the Tulsa game, which is a great example, where Jalen McMillan just dropped a 40-yard touchdown where he was wide open running down the left sideline. It's not necessarily that there are plays like that every week where that happens, but it's just this feeling of, they didn't score on like these 3 or 4 drives, and then you go watch those 3 or 4 drives and it's, that was an easy miss, or, oh man, there were just a couple of plays here and there where the term that the offense has used is there was more meat on the bone. Like, we have not played up to our full potential. Ryan Grubb has said himself that this offense is playing at a 7 right now.
That feels a little bit like coach speak to me. I don't think you can have 42 points as your lowest output or 41 against Michigan State, whatever it was, and say you're playing at a 7. I think it's the right mentality to have, because as we're going to talk about, the rest of this league is so unbelievably good that as great as Washington looks, their schedule still has a lot of losable games on it, just because the Pac-12 is, as I've said, the best conference in the country. The best place to get tickets in the country is Game Time, however. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Maybe you want to get ahead of the crowds in getting a ticket to Oregon at Washington in a couple weeks. College Game Day better be there. It absolutely should. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts, it's the place to find last-minute seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. By the way, every dayers on YouTube may have noticed that was not water for the second segment sip. That is a little Minute Maid light pink lemonade.
Nice.
A quality product.
That is a high
Speaking of
beverage.
quality products, here's what we call the reverse segue. Pac-12 football is a high-quality product. Boom, just like that. So let's go through the rest of our power rankings. I've got Washington at number 1 because they've been utterly dominant against every team they have played so far. They've played 2 Power 5s who might not make a bowl game. Sure, I'll grant you that. But if you were a really good football team, how do you look against a team like that? The games were never in doubt. They were never in question. They were never in doubt. It was just Washington from the jump. They've been prepared. The team I've got right behind them are my Oregon Ducks, because the one thing that I've got Washington ahead of Oregon for is the Texas Tech game, because Oregon was sloppy and committed a lot of penalties, but also bringing your B- game at best, maybe C+ game on the road against a Power 5 team whose season has now been derailed because of an injury to their starting quarterback, unfortunately, and getting the win there, and then playing Colorado, who'd been feeling really good about themselves and moving the football through the air and just absolutely shutting them down with the best defensive effort I've seen from the Ducks in quite some time. I think if you're talking about the impressiveness of the games that Oregon has played so far, they crushed a Mountain West and an FCS opponent as well. I have the Ducks power rated at number 2. Who do you have second?
No, I also have Oregon number 2. We actually did this same thing where on Locked On Huskies here today, where we just did the top 4 teams, and I had Oregon at 2, and we'll get to the next ones in a minute. I'm assuming, but the biggest thing for me is just Oregon's offense, because Oregon's offense is just cooking, and it's not quite at the level of Washington's, which is why I couldn't, no matter what, I can't do that for bias reasons, but. But no,
Oregon runs it a bit more. They play a little bit more ball control
and a bit better. I love watching Bucky Irving, man. That dude can go.
Dude, he just doesn't go down.
No, he doesn't. He's so hard to tackle.
Like 3 guys converge on him, and then he just emerges and picks up 7 yards, and you're like, I don't know how you did that, but
I don't get it. But
he's fun to watch.
That's my biggest thing. I still do have questions about their defense. I'm not overly impressed with Colorado. I haven't been, and that's something where their offensive line was just so bad against Oregon, and that was one of the biggest things that I wanted to watch in that game, and it kind of went the way that I expected it would. And I'm not knocking Oregon when I say that. It's just I think that's told me more about Colorado than it did about Oregon, and I'm really interested to just kind of see what happens in that Washington game, which you and I are definitely going to be talking about a lot over the coming weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a massive game, and I agree, and I talked about on Locked On Ducks that Oregon's biggest tests are still ahead of them, but I think they've passed the ones that they've gotten so far really with flying colors. And on the pressure note, if you have a good defensive line, you will overpower Colorado. And that's what Oregon was able to do. But they also had 4 sacks plus 1 called back because of a flag that was against Texas Tech in the game, or else they would have had 5. So against their 2 Power 5 opponents, they've racked up 12 sacks so far. Are they going to have that rate against Washington? No, probably not. But it makes me more optimistic about their capability to get pressure compared to what they did last year, which was, I don't know if Michael Penix got touched by an Oregon defensive lineman last year. Like, it was the biggest reason I think
got hit late.
Yeah, yeah, he did get hit late once or twice. So we both have Oregon number 2. I have Utah power rated number 3 here. And look, this is contingent upon Cam Rising coming back somewhat, but I mean, he's expected to be back eventually at some point in the season, Roman, and they haven't played. I mean, yeah, they played a bad Baylor team and it wasn't pretty, but the fact that they're 4-0 and they've won every game by at least a touchdown, and the way they dominated Florida, who's back in the top 25 for East Coast bias reasons, I look at Utah and say, if you put Cam Rising in there, gosh almighty, is that defense good?
Oh, for sure. And that's my biggest thing with them. The coaching and the defense is just what has always driven this team. And that's why I also have them at number 3. And so without even communicating any of this,
we did not set this up. We did not set this up. And I imagine, by the way, you have USC at number 4.
I do.
And I have USC at number 4 because if you're looking at the totality of their body of work, UCLA was a top 25 team when Utah beat them. USC hasn't played a team as good as UCLA. That's part of the reason I have the Utes above them. The other thing, too, is against San Jose State and Arizona State, USC gave up 28 points in each of those games.
Yep.
And that's a question. Now, in the middle 2 games, they looked better. Nevada, 14 points, Stanford, 10 points. And I said, hey, that's what you want to see against those inferior opponents, is keep them to 17 points or less. But then to come back and give up 28 to Drew Pine and woeful ASU that got housed by Fred. Like, why did Fresno State have a more comfortable win on the same field against the same team than USC did? And no, I have them here at 4 ahead of Washington State because Caleb Williams is really good, and I know Lincoln Riley is great, and their weapons are amazing, and I know they can score a bunch of points. And I know Trojan fans are tired of hearing commentary about their defense, but guess what? It clearly hasn't been fixed yet. I saw signs of improvement for 2 games, but that was a step back against ASU.
No, I totally agree. And that was kind of my belief on the matter too, because how do you have the Heisman winner in Caleb Williams and you win by, and it's going to sound weird and spoiled saying this, by just 2 touchdowns at Arizona State.
It was a game in the second half.
Exactly. It was a game
late in the second half. It was a game in the fourth quarter.
Exactly. That can't happen. If you want to make the playoff, that cannot happen. I think that the AP saved them by only dropping them 1 spot.
Well, I mean, when you win the game by 2 scores, but when you're expected to win by, 30 or more,
yeah,
that's certainly worthy in my view of being dropped there because they were not impressive. But USC, I think, has, of these 4 teams, the most room to grow by the end of the year. Like, you could look at how they're playing now and how they're playing at the end of the season. You could say, gosh, they're a much better football team now. I think Oregon can clean up some penalties and run the ball better against a front that isn't Colorado's. I think Washington, gosh, I don't know, can run the football a little bit better. But
they can get after the quarterback a little bit better, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, but I mean, they have 2 good edge rushers, so I'm not particularly worried about that. But USC, with the way the defense is playing, the way the offense did well, but I wouldn't say spectacular against a pretty bad Arizona State defense. Like, I do play-by-play for Southern Utah, and Southern Utah went to Tempe, and against that ASU team, allowed 24 points, and USC allowed 28. That's not great. That's not where you'd like to see. So that's why I have, I'm not sitting here saying USC can't win the conference. Of course they can't. Lincoln Riley teams have won conference championships without a great defense for quite some time. They've done it over and over and over again, going back to his time at Oklahoma, but I look at that compared to the other 3, and I say the bodies of work, Utah without Cam Rising being 4-0 right now and having a ranked win on their schedule, and then the way Oregon and Washington have looked against the teams that they've played, to me, holistically, has been more impressive than USC. This is where it starts to get interesting. I've got Washington State at number 5, Roman. I do. I don't.
I do too.
Okay, we're in lockstep agreement here because what else can you say? What else would Washington State need to do? Their schedule right now is actually more impressive than USC's.
Yes.
I just trust Caleb Williams more than Cam Ward, who is having a remarkable season.
Cam Ward's been spectacular. And I remember, like, there back in the day before the Michael Penix era, there was some talk. There weren't any legitimate rumors, but when it was very clear the Huskies were going to take a transfer quarterback, one name that was floated was by tape heads and everything was, this Cam Ward guy. This Cam Ward guy is super talented. And you saw it a little bit last year, and he's just continued to put it together. And he's been so impressive, man. He's somebody who I love watching him because he's just really, really talented.
Yeah, he's dynamic. That is an underrated NFL draft prospect in 2024. Someone who is not going to be a first, second, or probably even third rounder. But if you told me one day a team takes a late round flyer, a starter gets hurt, and Cam Ward comes in, starts having success, I can see it. He makes a lot of plays outside the pocket. Arm, mobility, size, quick release. probably the quickest release of anybody in the pack. Maybe Shedeur Sanders is quicker, but I think Ward's a little bit tighter. He doesn't wind it up, but he's got the arm strength. I mean, and when he plays at a high level, Washington State wins. Well, what do you know? He's playing at a ridiculously high level. Washington State is 4-0. We have to power out the rest of the pack, though, because what do you do with Oregon State after that game up in Pullman? What do you do with UCLA after how they looked against Utah?
Questions.
I tell you what you do. If you've forgotten a grocery item, you just call it DoorDash. So if you're missing the syrup for your pancakes, you ran out of your favorite coffee creamer, whatever you need with DoorDash grocery delivery, you can get what you want right when you need it. Love the convenience of getting what you want right to your door. With DoorDash delivery, you can stock up for the week or order last-minute cravings conveniently. You've trusted DoorDash to deliver your restaurant favorites, and now you can get delivery for your groceries that actually delivers too. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order, up to a $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. Limited time offer, terms apply. That's 50% off, up to $20 minimum, no subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. All right, so Roman and I, on a blind power rankings joint segment here, are in lockstep agreement 1 through 5. Washington, Oregon, Utah, USC, Washington State, based on what we have seen to this point in the season. Frankly, there's an argument for Washington State to be above USC. I thought about it. I really, really did. I just look at Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and I say, I know what they're capable of.
Exactly.
But that is not a big gap to me between Wazoo and USC. And Wazoo, talked about them as a Pac-12 contender yesterday on the show. Why? Because they have perhaps the most favorable schedule in terms of who they miss. Now, they have to play at Oregon, at Washington, and at UCLA. Those are tough games, but they don't play USC and they don't play Utah. That's a couple of major breaks. So keep your eye on the Cougars because, as we know, that's a good football team, and as I've long said, that is a good football coach. So, Washington State 5. I have UCLA at number 6.
So we are going to be a little bit different here. This is good.
Okay.
I have Oregon State next.
Okay, so here's my thinking. When I'm assessing the body of work I've seen so far, UCLA had a cupcake non-conference with 2 respectable G5s, but not great in San Diego State and Coastal Carolina. They were dominant against both of them. North Carolina Central, as one commenter aptly put it, sounds like a Tar Heel fan site more than a football team. So that game is irrelevant. But I watched them go into Rice-Eccles Stadium. Granted, the Utes had a backup quarterback, but that UCLA defense looks vastly improved. And like Lincoln Riley, that's been a question of Chip Kelly teams. Do you have a good enough defense? I've liked their front 4 since the start of the season. I still really like their front 4 because they are gnarly. And I think that their performance against Utah in that environment was more impressive to me than Oregon State at Washington State because the Beavs really were out of that game and playing from behind from the jump, whereas UCLA, they couldn't move the football with a true freshman quarterback, which is my concern with them, but they were in it until the very end.
So that's actually why I have UCLA at 7 to get ahead of myself a little bit there. Okay. I really like what I've seen from Dante Moore, but there's so many questions about him being a true freshman. And what are the growing pains going forward going to look like? Because the defense looked good. There were some things that I really did like about UCLA's game. But for me personally, I put Oregon State ahead of them because I have a little bit more faith in their defense going forward, in Damian Martinez, in that offensive line that I know you, Spencer, love so much. And I think that I don't have a lot of faith in DJ personally. I wouldn't be surprised, and I know that's something we talked about before the season, if Aiden Childs does end up coming in at some point. But then it's those same questions of a true freshman. But just with the other pieces around Oregon State, I like those a little bit more than UCLA's, and that's kind of where I gave them that slight edge over the Bruins.
I see that. I think we're splitting hairs a little bit there.
Yeah.
I still go with UCLA because I look, it was a backup quarterback, but remember there was a pick 6 in that game from Dante Moore. So that UCLA defense just went on the road and gave up 7 points. So at the very least, I know that you can't just line up and run the ball down UCLA's throats. You have to be able to move it through the air. I mean, through their 4 games, their defense cannot have looked much better, whereas Oregon State's can. So that's why I have that flip-flop. So I have UCLA 6, Oregon State at 7 to this point. These can change. I mean, goodness gracious, how big is that Oregon State-Utah game on Friday?
Ooh.
For the Bees.
I'm excited.
For the Bees.
It's going to be a fun game to watch.
I mean,
no, seriously, it's huge.
I don't think, just as a quick side note, I don't think it's overstating things to say that Oregon State's hopes of getting to the conference title game are on the line right there.
I agree.
Because you're going to have to be at least 7-2, and I don't see 7 straight wins if you lose at Wazoo and then to Utah at home with
Especially
or
the rest
without
of the schedule that they have too. It's not.
Yeah, and I mean their schedule gives them breaks, but having that Wazoo loss on there, they still have to play Washington and they still have to play at Oregon.
Right.
Yeah, it's tough, but more on that coming later in the week. So behind Oregon State at number 8, I've got Colorado. I know that Oregon blasted them on Saturday and kind of gave a lot of Buffs fans a reality check. To me, that was more about Oregon's defense and how that secondary played combined with the defensive front than it was about Colorado's offense not being capable. I think Travis Hunter was a missing piece for them on both sides in a significant way. Not enough to shift the game, but that's a Colorado team that played 2 Power 5s and a G5 and scored at least 28 points in all of those games. And I think they just ran into a talent mismatch against Oregon. But when they play a team that's on similar footing with them, I still think they're going to be able to move the football really well. And I like Shedeur Sanders. I've got them here at 8.
So I have them at 9. I have Arizona at 8.
Yeah, and I had Arizona at 9.
So this is good what we're doing here. And I want to talk about what you said about Colorado because they're just the team to talk about, right? So I like what I've seen from Shedeur. Travis Hunter missing that game is not the reason they lost.
No.
But I've kind of been just that reality check for Colorado fans this season, where the biggest thing that I'm kind of still harping on is Colorado State beat themselves. And it wasn't necessarily the best game for Colorado that they played a couple weeks ago against Colorado State. And yeah, all the other things that happened during that game were what they were. But Colorado State was penalized 20 times for 200 something yards.
Yeah, it was pretty absurd.
Yeah, and that team is less talented than Colorado. And yeah, there's all the motivation. There are all the extra things that were going on with that game that I'm not going to get into. Because
okay, but devil's advocate here, TCU is more talented.
I was not impressed with TCU either. I'm not.
I wasn't that impressed with TCU, but if you're talking about composite talent on the team, I know the Buffs brought in the number 1 portal class and everything, but I think TCU top to bottom, you would grade as a more talented football team than Colorado's roster.
Oh, I agree with you there. That's not my point. It's just TCU. I feel like they lost a lot from last season, and that was just kind of one of their growing pains kinds of moments of let's kind of see what we're.
Going from 13-2 by the time the season ended, a pullback is what I think they're on pace to end up being, which is a 7-8 win team in the Big 12, and going on the road and winning that game, I think that still is a feather in Colorado's cap.
Oh no, it absolutely is. I don't want to deny them that. But I just think that TCU is not. When we look back on it at the end of the season, let's say they are at 7-5 that you just mentioned. I don't think that we're going to be looking at them in the same light of, oh wow, that team was in the national championship last season.
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely not that team. I thought coming into the year, it's a classic pullback team. I thought they'd be a 7-9 win range somewhere in there, and I think they can still probably be that. Probably more likely 7 or 8 than 9 after we saw that game against Colorado. So I wanted to put Arizona above, but I watched them squeak out a 1-point win at Stanford. And the consolation I offered to Wildcat fans yesterday on the show was, look, that's what I would label as a lean-lose mood for the Arizona fan base. It's like, we won, but did that really feel the way it should have? No, it definitely did not. However, can you think of a team, Roman, that was a 10-3 football team by the time the 2022 season came to a close that also struggled to win at Stanford last year? Yep. And who was that team?
Would that be your Beefs?
It would be Oregon State. And look, I think what happens is the farm is just not a good environment right now for college football. It can be tough to get up and get motivated for it. We'll see how Oregon does as a 27-point favorite this Saturday against the Cardinal. But that's the one reason I think Arizona's a more complete team than Colorado at their best. but I watched them beat Stanford by 1, who might win 1 game all season, and I just went, I got to go with the Buffs. They've been more impressive through the first 3 or 4 games.
So your original point is why I gave them that slight edge, because it was like you said earlier, we're splitting hairs here, and I gave them that slight edge because I do think that they're a just more talented team, and I have more faith in, like, I think Shedeur is way better than Jaden Delora, but I just have more faith in that receiving core that they have there and what that offense is able to do when it's clicking, compared to Colorado, and especially Colorado's just the offensive line. I think the defense is fine. I think Travis Hunter really does make that defense. So without him,
Arizona's defense continues to look much improved, by the way.
No, it does. It does.
Much improved. They're going to get a big test against your Huskies, of course, this weekend. So we flip Oregon State and UCLA. We flip Colorado and Arizona. I then have Cal at 10, ASU 11, Stanford 12.
Yep.
I don't think there's really much debate there. And just on those 3 teams, Cal is the best of them. Cal is a 12-point favorite against ASU at home this weekend, so the betting markets also think that Cal is better than ASU and Stanford here. But gosh almighty, with how good everybody else looks, they could be in for a rough season.
No, I agree. And I mean, the biggest thing for me that I wanted to see more of going into the year was Jaden Rashada. And
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And then he gets hurt. Now it's Drew Pine, and I mean Pine might actually raise the floor on ASU's offense,
but he also lowers the ceiling.
I agree with that as well. And long term for the program, Drew Pine's not the answer. Getting like this needed to be all in on a rebuilding year, and starting Rashada would have been the best way to go. And they were going to get that chance, and now they won't. Real quick, we'll wrap up on this. Michael Penix is now the betting favorite for the Heisman Trophy, which is not surprising to me. He is the leading passer in the country. He's on a top 10 team. I think the biggest thing, Roman, that can derail his potential Heisman campaign is Washington losing.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's the one thing that concerns me about this is I feel like 2 losses, because 1 loss, let's say it's to Oregon or USC. 1 loss is, oh man, that's a bummer, but let's keep watching. Let's see what he can do against some of these teams. But 2 losses and it's over. And it has nothing to do with him because he could finish the year as the nation's leading passer again. And I think that's, like I said earlier in the show, that's the biggest difference between other teams and this team is this team is going to continue to get up and continue to just be motivated because all those guys that came back for this season came back with that goal of we are going to get to the playoff and we are going to get to the national championship. And it's still early, but Mike is obviously driving that boat. We have Rome, Jalen McMillan, Braylon Trice, Zion Tupuola-Fatui, all these guys that could have gone to the NFL. They all came back. And this right here, I'm not saying they all came back to win Michael Penix the Heisman, but this right here is what it was all about.
But if the Pac-12 sends a team to the playoff, I think really just Oregon or Washington. I think if either Oregon or Washington make the playoff, their quarterback's winning the Heisman.
I agree with that.
Like I don't know that there would be a storyline. It's hard to predict for sure, but I mean Penix and Bo Nix's Heisman campaigns have been well rooted. Going back to last year, frankly, I mean, Bo Nix got into the top 3 for Heisman odds when Oregon was in the midst of an 8-game winning streak. Michael Penix isn't coming up on anybody. The Heisman campaign has, predates the season for sure, and he's not like he's playing in big games. He's going to play Oregon at home. He's going to play at USC. He's going to play Oregon State and Washington State too. So there will be big games against good teams in front of a big audience. I mean, it's really just unfortunate that he doesn't get to play Colorado this year because I think that Colorado game, even if you are a realist about the Buffs and understand, okay, it's not actually a great football team as much as it is a great story, but they're still a respectable football team that draws a lot of interest. That's a feather in Bo's cap for the Heisman campaign.
No,
because
absolutely.
Guess what? You had a lot of eyeballs there, and Bo was awesome.
Yep. And this is what I'll say because I think that unless one of these 2 things happen, you're right that the whoever makes the college football playoff from the Pac-12, if that happens, is going to win the Heisman. Is unless Blake Corum runs for 2,000 yards, which I don't think is going to happen,
and he has Donovan Edwards there.
Yeah, exactly. Or Quinn Ewers just starts throwing for 450 yards a game.
That would also be challenging.
Also not going to happen. And then you can also, but like I'm still kind of curious to see how he is going forward. Jordan Travis at Florida State. That's the old That's it. That's where we are at this point.
I think Bo has the name brand recognition and Penix will have the stats to surpass either of those guys. But there's a long time between now and then, of course. Roman Tomashoff hosts Locked On Huskies. He's at rtomashoff34 on Twitter, Monday through Friday on YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Washington fans, go over there and check him out. Roman, good stuff today.
Spencer, thanks for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.